The legislation is critically important. And we have been, as an administration, the president has been unambiguous that S1, the For the People Act, needs to be passed. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act needs to be passed.
The odds of getting any voting rights legislation through Congress are incredibly slim as we have this conversation tonight, though we are increasingly a nation of voter suppression enthusiasts, so we have that going for us. Senator Joe Manchin effectively killed the For the People Act when he announced he'll oppose it. And here's what Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had to say about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act today.
It's against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race already, and so I think it's unnecessary.
So, Jason, I'll give you this dramatic reading from our mutual friend, Eugene Robinson. Unless Manchin changes his position on the filibuster, 10 Republican senators would have to cross the aisle and join with the Democrats. So far, there is one, Senator Lisa Murkowski. The other 9 must be in some parallel dimension visible only to Manchin, where all the leprechauns, tooth fairies, and unicorns are hiding. AB, having been told we lost Jason's signal, the question's going to go to you, and I'll put it politely. When did the Democrats become the party of Fred Rogers?
Brian, I listened to really the fascinating interviews in Lawrence's Hour with the president of the Urban League and the NAACP, who met with Manchin today. Joe Manchin nicely came out and said, "Oh, it was really great. We're just going to sort of keep talking. No, nobody changed their minds." And the problem is that while everyone wants to focus on Joe Manchin, this never should have gotten to the point where civil rights leaders are going to Joe Manchin in June to ask him to change his mind. The party leaders, the president, his administration, his top people took it upon themselves to think that wooing him privately over these months was more effective than actually changing the bill. It's an open secret in Washington that H.R. 1 had no chance of passing through the Senate as S1 and being signed into law, that it has incredible flaws, was crafted in 2019 without consulting key stakeholders in the electoral process, the people around the country who have to run elections, and know that these mandates included in the bill without permanent streams of funding could not be met on time for 2022 or 2024. And they knew it was what the Meet the Press team called in the first read note on NBC today, a messaging bill that was never intended to pass. This is a bill that was passed, that was crafted before the 2020 election, before President Trump, then President Trump, designed 8 months in advance a plan to propagandize that mail-in ballots would steal the election from him. And then we know what happened since. All of these bills that started appearing in December and January in these past months in these Republican-controlled legislatures designed to restrict voting are the house on fire. H.R. 1 doesn't deal with that, doesn't deal with what's going on in Georgia, where it's not about the vote casting so much as the vote counting, because they're increasing partisan influence by the state legislature and people who are not nonpartisan election officials in the process, thereby corrupting the process and ultimately, leaving open the door that those elections can be stolen. And so this bill needs to be revamped. And I know the administration and the party leadership in the Senate and the House knew this months ago. And if they wanted to address the emergency that these state legislature bills are creating, they needed to go back to the drawing board, and they needed to do it before Joe Manchin was the center of this debate.
Jason Johnson, your signal is back, enough so that I can see you shaking your head no.
Yeah, look, let's be honest. Let's not pretend that Joe Manchin's opposition is based on some deep philosophical concern about what's actually the content of either piece of legislation. Remember, he was an original co-sponsor of the For the People Act. He's going back on something that he co-sponsored. He says that he's perfectly okay with the John Lewis Civil Rights Act, and that's the one that pretty much establishes a return of some variation of preclearance, which would stop what happened in Georgia, which would provide ways for the federal government to get involved. Joe Manchin doesn't care about re-election. Joe Manchin doesn't care about minority voting rights. Joe Manchin doesn't care about his legacy. This is a power move on his behalf. If he really cared, if this was actually an issue of changes that needed to be made in either legislation, guess what? He could say that. Joe Manchin tomorrow could, reenact that scene from Dave getting in office with Joe Biden over the weekend, order some pizza and rewrite the darn bill to his liking so he could pass it. He's not doing that because he's not interested in either piece of legislation being passed. So we have to dispel with this narrative that this is a technical issue as opposed to a larger philosophical issue. He is a guy who knows he's not going to get reelected. He knows that he's getting a lot of pressure from the Koch brothers. He knows this also has nothing to do with what West Virginia voters want because they're in favor of most of these pieces of legislation. This is about his own power and his own sort of ideological flex before he eventually rides off into the sunset because he won't get reelected in 2024.